You came from nothing. You are nothing. Reginald Whitfield's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. Silver-haired, straight-backed, and completely certain of himself, he stood in the center of his own estate with 200 guests watching, and said it again, louder this time, so no one in the room could pretend they hadn't heard. And tonight, in front of everyone who matters, my son is going to finally see what he married. Every head turned. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Somewhere near the back, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. Amara didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look away. She simply reached into her small clutch, checked her phone once, read whatever was on the screen, and slipped it back. Something in her shoulders settled, the way a person relaxes when they already know how a story ends. She looked at Reginald with calm, quiet eyes. She knew something the entire room didn't. Before the night was over, Reginald Whitfield would learn exactly who he had just humiliated. 2 hours earlier, the estate had looked nothing like a disaster. Amara had arrived in a plain grey car, wearing a simple dress and flat shoes. No diamonds, no designer label. No one greeted her at the door with the warmth they saved for the guests who arrived in black cars with drivers. She walked in the way she always did, quietly, without needing the room to notice her. But she noticed the room. At the entrance, a young server fumbled a tray of glasses. Crystal tilted. Amara caught it without thinking, steadied the young man's hands, and smiled. "You've got it," she said softly. "Breathe." He exhaled, like she had just saved his life. She knew the valet's name before she handed him her keys. She knew the coat check girl's name too, and asked about her sister's new baby. She tipped them both more than most guests tipped all night, not because she was trying to impress anyone, because that was simply who she was. Amara had been married to Victor Whitfield for 2 years. In all that time, she had never told his family the truth about her father. Not his name, not his work, not what he had built over 40 years of quiet, determined effort. She had made that choice on purpose, with her eyes open. She wanted Victor's family to see her, the real her, before they saw what stood behind her. She wanted to be loved for the woman she was, not for the name she carried. So she drove a modest car. She wore simple clothes. She let them fill in the blanks themselves, and they did. Reginald Whitfield had decided who Amara was the moment his son brought her home. He had looked at her plain dress and her ordinary shoes and her absence of inherited wealth and made up his mind in about 30 seconds. He never looked again. Tonight, with 200 guests assembled, crystal chandeliers throwing warm light across the marble floors, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner, he had decided to share that verdict with the room. He had an audience. He had always been at his worst with an audience, and Amara stood in the center of it all, still, unhurried, shoulders settled, holding a secret that was already on its way through the front door. Reginald didn't lower his voice. That was the thing Amara noticed most. He wasn't speaking to her anymore. He was speaking to the room. He took 2 steps back, opened his hands wide, and turned slowly, making sure every face in that ballroom was looking at him before he continued. The string quartet had stopped playing. No one had told them to. They just felt it, the way everyone in that room felt it, that something had shifted, and music no longer fit. "I had you looked into," Reginald said. Amara's eyes lifted. "You did what?" "You heard me." He reached into his jacket and produced nothing. No document, no folder, because he didn't need one. The confidence in his voice was the only prop he required. "I hired a firm. Quiet, discreet, thorough. I wanted to know exactly what had walked into my family." He paused, letting the silence do its work. "And you know what they found?" The room waited. Nothing. He spread his hands. No estate. No trust fund. No family name worth a single conversation at this table. Just a woman who came from nowhere, spotted an opportunity, and aimed high. His lip curled slightly. "Very high, I'll give you that." A few guests shifted on their feet. Someone near the fireplace looked at the floor, but no one spoke, because Reginald Whitfield was still smiling, And in this house, that smile had always meant the same thing. That he had already won and was simply enjoying the last few moments before everyone else accepted it. Amara stood very still, not frozen, still, the way a person stands when they have decided that nothing being said has the power to touch them. "Your investigator," she said quietly, "wasn't very thorough." Reginald laughed. A short, clean sound with nothing warm in it. "My investigator is the best money can buy. But then, money is something your kind never quite understands. You only know how to reach for it." The words landed hard. A woman near the bar set down her glass. Victor stepped forward. He had been standing just behind Amara, his jaw tight, his hands still at his sides. "Dad, that's enough. Stay out of this, Victor. She's my wife. She's a mistake." Reginald turned to face his son fully, and something in his expression shifted. Not softer, harder. This was the moment he had been building toward. "And I am giving you the chance, right now, in front of this family, to correct it." He let the room breathe for exactly 1 second. "Choose, her or this family, her or your name, her or every dollar and every door and every opportunity that comes with the Whitfield name." The chandeliers hummed. 200 people held completely still. Victor looked at his father, then at the silver-haired guests arranged around the room like an audience that had been expecting this exact performance. Then he looked at Amara, at the woman who had never once asked him for anything, who knew every server's name in this building, who had caught a falling tray and whispered "breathe" to a frightened stranger without a second thought. He didn't need a second to think. "I choose her," Victor said. "I'll always choose her." The smile on Reginald's face didn't disappear all at once. It faded the way light fades when a cloud moves, slowly, then completely. What replaced it was something colder and uglier, the expression of a man who had never seriously considered that the answer might go the other way. "Then you are dead to me." His voice was low now, almost quiet. "You hear me, Victor? Dead." For a moment, no one moved. Then someone near the back of the room lifted a phone. Then another. Not all at once. Slowly, the way people do when they've decided that what they're watching needs to be remembered. Little screens appeared along the edges of the crowd, red recording lights blinking in the candlelight like small, steady eyes. Reginald saw them. He didn't stop. He didn't lower his voice or reconsider his posture. He turned back to the room with his chin raised and his shoulders square, and he read those phones the way a certain kind of man always reads an audience, as proof that what he was doing mattered, that people were paying attention, that he was, as he had always believed, the most important person in the room. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. And somewhere near the front windows, Amara glanced toward the long dark driveway outside, where a pair of headlights had just turned through the gate. It was Celestine who moved first. She had been standing near the edge of the gathering, still holding her champagne glass, watching her husband's performance with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to look supportive without saying a word. But now her free hand flew to her wrist and the glass stopped moving, and her face changed. "My bracelet." Her voice came out high and sharp. "It's gone." The room, which had barely started breathing again after Victor's answer, went still a second time. Celestine pressed her bare wrist with her fingers, as if pressing hard enough might bring the bracelet back. Then she looked up. Her eyes moved across the room slowly, the way a person's eyes move when they already know where they're going to land. They landed on Amara. "She was standing right next to me." Celestine's voice climbed. "Not 20 minutes ago, I felt her brush my arm. I thought nothing of it." She turned to the room, her chin trembling just enough to look convincing. "She took it. My grandmother's diamonds. She took it right off my wrist." The crowd shifted. The mood that had been tilting, carefully, uncomfortably, away from Reginald, swung back with sudden force. A theft was something people understood. A theft was simple. "That isn't true," Amara said. Her voice was level. Not loud, not shaking. Just clear. "Liar." Celestine didn't hesitate. I knew it the moment you walked in. I told Reginald. I said, you let certain people into your home, and this is exactly what happens. Reginald was already moving. He crossed the room in long strides and stopped in front of a broad man in a dark suit who had been standing near the far wall all evening. The head of estate security. His name was Bernard, and he had flat, careful eyes and the steady manner of someone who followed instructions without needing to understand them. Bernard. Reginald's voice was quiet and very controlled. This woman has stolen from my wife. Search her bag. Now. Bernard hesitated for just a moment. One small pause that nobody in the room missed, though most pretended not to notice. Sir, I would need her to consent. This is my house. Reginald didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Search it. Bernard turned to Amara. His expression carried something close to an apology, though he didn't say one out loud. Amara looked at him steadily. Then she held out her clutch. The room watched in complete silence as Bernard opened the small bag and turned it over in front of 200 people. A phone, a folded tissue, a tube of lip balm, a single house key. He shook it once, then again. He ran his thumb along the lining. He held it upside down. Nothing fell out but a stick of gum. Check again, Celestine said. Bernard checked again. He turned the clutch over a second time, pressed the lining flat with both hands, and looked inside one more time. Then he straightened up and looked at Celestine with the careful expression of a man who understood he was about to deliver news that nobody on that side of the room wanted to hear. There's nothing here, Mrs. Whitfield. Then she hid it on her person. Check her. That's enough. Victor's voice cut through the room like something thrown hard. He stepped forward, his face tight with a fury he was barely holding in place. You will not touch her again. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before, heavier, less certain of itself. Amara hadn't moved. She stood in the center of the room with her empty clutch in her hand, and her shoulders perfectly straight, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was so calm that it seemed to make everything around it quieter just by existing. The bracelet, she said, is on the side table by the fireplace. You set it down when you fixed your earring. I was watching from across the room. That was about 40 minutes ago. Every head in the ballroom turned at the same moment. There, on the small marble table beside the fireplace, a circle of diamonds caught the candlelight and threw it across the ceiling in tiny, scattered pieces. A footman walked over. He picked it up. He held it in the air without saying a word, because there was nothing to say. The room's mood didn't shift this time. It curdled, slowly, the way milk curdles, quietly, and then all at once, and then there was no going back. Celestine said nothing. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her champagne glass hung at her side, forgotten. Reginald looked at the bracelet, then at his wife, then at the 200 faces looking back at him, many of them now holding phones they were no longer bothering to hide. He straightened his jacket. He lifted his chin, and he kept going anyway. The front doors opened, not dramatically, not with a bang or a rush of cold air or any of the things that signal, in films, that something important has arrived. They simply opened, the way doors open when someone with a steady hand turns a handle and walks through without breaking stride. The man who stepped into the ballroom was older, calm, and dressed in a plain dark coat. No tie, no cufflinks catching the light, no assistant at his elbow carrying anything on his behalf. He had no entourage and made no announcement. He simply walked in the way certain people walk into rooms, not like he owned the place, but like the question of ownership had never once crossed his mind as something worth thinking about. He paused just inside the doorway. His eyes moved across the room slowly, taking in everything without rushing. The crowd standing in loose, uncertain clusters. The phones held low but no longer hidden. Bernard still holding Amara's clutch. The footman near the fireplace with the diamond bracelet in his upturned hand. And then, in the center of it all, his daughter, standing straight, shoulders back, completely alone, in the middle of 200 people. His face, until that moment, had been completely still. It went cold. Not angry. Not loud. Cold in the way that deep water is cold. Quiet on the surface, and absolutely serious underneath. He looked at Amara the way a person looks at someone they love when they have arrived too late to prevent something and are now, very calmly, deciding what comes next. He crossed the room without hurrying. People moved out of his path without quite knowing why. He stopped beside Amara and rested one hand lightly on her shoulder. Just one hand, just for a moment. And something in that single gesture said everything that words would have taken much longer to say. Amara exhaled. It was a small sound. Most people in the room didn't hear it. But it was the first full breath she had taken all evening. And the way her shoulders dropped half an inch told anyone paying close attention that the person standing beside her was the one person in the world she had been waiting for, without letting anyone see her wait. Reginald watched this from across the room. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the man in the plain coat the way he looked at everything that didn't immediately fit a category he recognized, with the flat, impatient expression of someone about to assign a value and move on. He saw an older man, a plain coat, no markers of anything that required his attention. He had already looked away when Celestine moved. She had recovered herself somewhat, straightened her posture, lifted her chin, reclaimed the expression she wore at charity events and board dinners, and every occasion that required her to look like a woman completely in control of her surroundings. She stepped into the man's path before he could move further into the room, and she looked at him the way she had looked at Amara 3 hours earlier, with the calm, total certainty of someone who has never seriously considered that a situation might not be hers to manage. "The staff entrance," she said pleasantly, "is around the back." The man stopped. He looked at Celestine without any particular expression. Then, before anyone in the room had time to react, she raised her champagne glass and tipped it. Not accidentally, not in a stumble, but with the clean, deliberate motion of a woman making a point. And a long wave of pale gold wine poured down the front of his coat. The room gasped. One sharp sound from many mouths at once. The man looked down at his coat, at the dark stain spreading across the front of it, wine soaking into the fabric in the particular way that means it will not come out easily. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. Then he looked up at Celestine, and he smiled. It was not the smile of a man who found something funny. It was not warm, and it was not performed for the room. It was the smile of a man who has just been handed exactly what he needed, and knows it, and is in absolutely no hurry to explain that to anyone just yet. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low and completely even. "That's very helpful." Celestine blinked, her mouth opened slightly. She had been expecting anger, or embarrassment, or the flustered retreat of a man who understood he was out of place. She had not been expecting that smile. She did not know what to do with that smile. Neither did anyone else in the room. But somewhere near the bar, a man in a charcoal suit had gone completely still. He was staring at the man in the wine-stained coat with an expression that had no performance in it at all, just pure, unguarded recognition, and his face had gone the color of ash. The CFO's name was Douglas Hale, and he had worked for Whitfield Industries for 11 years. He was not a man who lost his composure easily. He had sat across negotiating tables from some of the most powerful people in 3 continents. He had delivered bad news to boards of directors without his voice shaking. He had, on 2 separate occasions, talked Reginald Whitfield down from decisions that would have cost the company everything, and he had done it calmly, professionally, without leaving fingerprints on the conversation. But right now, Douglas Hale looked like a man watching a building fall. He had been standing near the bar when the front doors opened. He had watched the man in the plain coat walk in. He had watched Celestine step forward. He had watched the wine pour and heard the gasp from the room. And then the man had turned slightly, and the light from the chandeliers had caught his face at a certain angle, and Douglas had stopped breathing. He knew that face. He knew it from boardrooms and financial publications, and one very long meeting in Accra 2 years ago, where a quiet man in a plain suit had sat at the head of a table and, without raising his voice once, had restructured the terms of a $2 billion infrastructure contract in a way that left everyone else in the room wondering how they had agreed to something so different from what they had walked in expecting. Douglas set his glass down on the bar behind him, carefully, without looking. "Mr. Osei," he said. It came out just above a whisper, but the room was quiet enough that it carried. The name moved through the ballroom the way a stone moves through still water, out from Douglas in every direction, passing from one face to the next as people repeated it to the person beside them, some recognizing it immediately, others searching their memory, all of them understanding from the tone alone that it mattered enormously. Reginald heard it. He turned from Celestine, his expression still carrying the impatient irritation of a man whose evening had been interrupted by something beneath his attention. He looked at Douglas. Douglas was already crossing the room toward him, moving quickly, his face arranged into the careful blankness of someone trying very hard not to show how frightened they are. He stopped beside Reginald and leaned close. "Reginald." His voice was low and very controlled. "That man, the one Celestine that is Kwame Osei." Reginald's expression didn't change. "Who?" "Chairman of Osei Global." Douglas paused, making sure every word landed cleanly. "The infrastructure contract. The $2 billion contract that is currently keeping this company alive and every one of our partnerships intact." Another pause. "He owns it, Reginald. He owns the contract. He owns the terms. He owns the renewal that's sitting unsigned on your desk right now." Douglas looked at him steadily. "He owns us." The ballroom tilted. Not physically, but something shifted in the air of the room. A change in pressure, a change in temperature, and 200 people felt it without being able to name it, the way you feel a storm coming before the sky has done anything you can point to. Reginald's glass slipped. He caught it, but only just, his fingers closing around it a half-second later than they should have. His eyes moved from Douglas to the man in the wine-stained coat, and for the first time all evening, the absolute certainty that had held his face in place since the moment he cornered Amara began to come apart at the edges. "That's not," he started. "He came in a plain coat. He doesn't need one," Douglas said quietly. Kwame Osei had not moved from where he stood. He had not raised his voice or adjusted his posture or done anything at all to claim the room's attention. He hadn't needed to. The room had given it to him anyway, turning toward him the way rooms turn toward the thing that changes everything, slowly and then all at once. He looked at Reginald. When he spoke, his voice was exactly the same as it had been when he spoke to Celestine, low, even, unhurried. The voice of a man who had never once needed volume to be heard. "You spent your entire evening," Kwame said, "telling my daughter she was nothing." The room held its breath. I heard it from the driveway. His eyes didn't move from Reginald's face. The windows were open. Reginald's hand found the back of the nearest chair. His fingers closed around it. The color had left his face the way color leaves a room when the lights go out. All at once, completely, leaving something behind that looked like him but wasn't quite right anymore. He had spent 40 years building a name that opened every door in this city. He had spent one evening making sure that name would never mean the same thing again. And the man standing in front of him, wine stains spreading quietly across his plain dark coat, hadn't raised his voice once. Kwame reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone. It was a small, unhurried movement. The kind of movement you make when you are doing something routine, checking the time, silencing a notification. Nothing about it looked like the end of anything. But the room watched it the way you watch a match being struck in a dark room, very still, very aware that what happens in the next second will determine everything that comes after. He found the number he wanted. He pressed call. He lifted the phone to his ear. The call lasted less than a minute. "It's me." A pause while the other end answered. "The Whitfield contract. The $2 billion. His voice was the same as it had been all evening. Level, quiet. completely certain of itself. Freeze it tonight. Begin termination in the morning. A short pause. Yes, I'm sure. I'll explain when I'm back. He ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened all evening. Douglas Hale had gone completely still near the bar, one hand flat on the counter beside him, as if he needed something solid to hold on to. Several other guests who understood what they had just heard were looking at each other with the careful, sideways expressions of people trying to calculate how quickly they needed to move and in which direction. Then Reginald moved. He crossed the room in 4 steps, his hand out, his voice climbing for the first time all night into something that was no longer controlled. You can't do that. He stopped 2 feet from Kwame, breathing harder than he should have been. You can't just... That contract feeds half this company. That's hundreds of families. That's people who have nothing to do with tonight. Nothing to do with any of this. He spread his hands. His voice shifted, found something that was almost an appeal. That's thousands of jobs. That's the whole company. You can't. Kwame let him finish. He didn't step back. He didn't step forward. He simply stood where he was and waited until every word Reginald had to say had been said, and the space where more words might have come was empty. Then he turned to face him fully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the complete, unhurried attention of a man delivering a fact. You should have thought about that, Kwame said quietly, before you searched my daughter like a thief. Reginald opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He stood there in the center of his own ballroom, in the house he had spent 40 years filling with the right furniture and the right people and the right version of his own name. And for the first time in as long as anyone in that room could remember, Reginald Whitfield had nothing to say. Kwame turned away from him. He looked at Amara and then at Victor, and something in his expression shifted. Not much, just enough. The coldness that had settled on his face the moment he walked through the door and understood what had been done to his daughter softened, very slightly, at the edges. We're leaving, he said. All 3 of us. Amara nodded once. She picked up her clutch from the side table where Bernard had set it down after the search, and she held it at her side, and she did not look back at Celestine, or at the bracelet still sitting in the footman's hand, or at the 200 people watching from every corner of the room. She looked straight ahead, and she walked toward the door the way she had walked in, quietly, without needing anyone's permission. Victor fell into step beside her. His hand found hers. Kwame walked behind them both, unhurried, his wine-stained coat open at the front, his phone back in his pocket, his face already moving on to whatever came next. The crowd parted, and Reginald watched them go. He watched his son walk out of his house holding the hand of a woman he had spent 2 years trying to erase. He watched a man in a plain coat follow them through his front doors without once looking back. He heard the sound of the door closing. Not slammed, not dramatic, just closed, the ordinary sound of people leaving a place they were done with. And then his knees went, not all at once. Slowly, the way tall things fall, a long moment of resistance, and then none at all. His hand reached back for the chair and missed it. His other hand found the edge of a table and missed that too. And Reginald Whitfield, who had stood in the center of this room 3 hours ago and told his son's wife that she was not fit to clean his floors, sank down onto those same floors in his $1,000 suit, with 200 people watching and every phone in the room pointing directly at him. The marble was cold. He had always been so proud of that marble. The footage was everywhere before the last guests had even left the estate. 200 people had been in that ballroom. Most of them had phones. Most of those phones had been recording for the better part of an hour, and by the time Kwame Ose's car had cleared the end of the driveway, the clips were already moving, passed from one screen to the next, stitched together, captioned, shared by people who had not been in the room but understood immediately what they were looking at. The headline wrote itself. It always does, when the truth is this clean. By midnight, the videos had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. By 3 in the morning, the number had crossed 1 million. People watched Reginald's face as he said the words, "No estate, no trust, no history worth a damn." They watched Celestine's hand tip the glass. They watched the wine spread across Kwame Osei's plain dark coat, and they watched him look down at it and smile. And that smile, quiet, patient, already knowing something the room didn't, was the image that most people shared when they wanted to show someone else what the night had been. By sunrise, the story had a life of its own, and that life was moving very fast. Whitfield Industries opened on the market that morning and began falling almost immediately. Slowly at first, the way a stone rolls before it drops. A few percentage points in the first hour, enough for analysts to notice, not enough for anyone to panic. But by 10 o'clock the news had fully caught up with the numbers, and by noon the stock had dropped 38% and was still moving in the wrong direction, and the phones at Whitfield headquarters were ringing with the voices of partners who were suddenly, urgently, unavailable for comment. The board called an emergency session at 2 in the afternoon. Reginald did not fight it. Whatever argument he might have made the night before, whatever version of the evening he might have tried to present as reasonable, the footage had made argument impossible. You cannot explain away something that 200 people recorded from 7 different angles. You cannot reframe a man sinking to his own marble floor in front of his entire social world. The board understood this clearly. The vote, when it came, was not close. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Reginald Whitfield was no longer the chairman of the company that carried his name. The legal process that followed was quieter, but no less certain. Amara filed a civil suit the following week. The claim was straightforward and well documented. The unlawful search of her personal belongings, conducted without her meaningful consent, in front of 200 witnesses, at the instruction of the estate's owner. Her legal team did not need to work very hard. The evidence was thorough, time-stamped, and had already been watched by several million people before the filing was complete. The Whitfield family settled within 3 weeks. The amount was sealed, but the apology was not. That was the one condition Amara's legal team had held firm on, and the one condition the Whitfield lawyers had tried longest to negotiate away, and the one condition that had not moved. The apology, signed by both Reginald and Celestine, formal and specific, and leaving nothing vague, was entered into the public court record. Permanent, undeniable, attached to their names in a way that no statement from a communications team could ever fully detach. Celestine's written apology was read aloud at the proceeding, in a courtroom, by a clerk with a flat, even voice who had no particular feelings about the words. It was read in full, without abbreviation, in the same city where she had thrown her wine and pointed her finger and said, "I knew it the moment you walked in." She was not present for the reading. Reginald was. Victor did not return to Whitfield Industries. He had not expected to, and he did not want to. He called Kwame 3 weeks after the gala and asked if there was a position available. Not a senior one, not something that reflected who his father-in-law was, but something real, something he could earn. Kwame told him to come in on Monday and speak to the hiring manager like everyone else. He did. He started near the bottom of the infrastructure division, in a role that required him to learn things he didn't know, and he was told clearly that his last name would not move him forward any faster than his work did. He didn't complain about that, not once. Amara went back to her life. She drove the same modest car. She wore the same simple clothes. She did not call any journalists or accept any of the interview requests that arrived steadily for the first 2 months. She did not post anything, not a statement, not a photograph, not a single line that acknowledged what had happened and what had followed. When people recognized her in public, she smiled politely and kept moving. Her silence said more than any statement could have. It always had. Here is what I keep coming back to. Reginald Whitfield didn't lose his empire because of bad luck. He didn't lose it because the wrong person walked through his door, or because the timing was against him, or because life treated him unfairly. He lost it because he looked at a woman in a simple dress and decided, before she said a single word, before she did a single thing, that she didn't matter, that she was beneath him, that the space between who she appeared to be and who he was gave him the right to say whatever he wanted about her, in public, with witnesses, and walk away clean. He made that decision loudly. He made it in front of 200 people. He made it with complete confidence, because that kind of confidence had always been safe before. Nobody had ever made it cost him anything. Until the night somebody did. That's not a story about one bad man at one party. That happens every day. In offices and restaurants and hospital waiting rooms and family dinners, and 100 other ordinary places where someone decides, based on how a person looks, or where they come from, or what they're wearing, that cruelty is available to them at no charge. Most of the time, there is no Kwame Osei in the driveway. Most of the time, the headlights don't appear. Most of the time, the person in the simple dress just has to carry it home quietly and alone. So, the question I want to leave with you isn't about Reginald, it's about the room. How many times have you been in that room? Not as the villain, most of us will never be Reginald, but as the crowd, as the person who watched and felt uncomfortable and decided that uncomfortable was enough, as the one who knew something was wrong but told themselves it wasn't their moment, wasn't their place, wasn't their fight, as the person who recorded it but didn't speak, who laughed a little because everyone else did, who looked away because looking away has always been the easiest thing available. That's the part none of us like to sit with. That's also the only part any of us can actually change. If this story landed somewhere real for you, drop a comment. Tell me where you were sitting in that room. Tell me what you would have done, or what you wish you had done somewhere else, somewhere real, when the moment was in front of you, and you let it pass. I read every one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Stories where the quietest person in the room turns out to be holding everything. Because the most dangerous person in any room is never the loudest one. It's the one they forgot to investigate.